Welcome to the Hanley Effect, a podcast by the Hanley Foundation designed to educate, change minds, and save lives. Our goal is to inspire you, showcase our innovations, and change the conversation about addiction and mental health. Join us as we unravel stories of resilience, recovery, and hope.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hanley Effect.
Wait a minute.
What?
I thought this was car talk. I thought that this week we were going to interview Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Listen, if you want to be click and clack at the Tappet brother, man, that was one of my favorite. We have never even mentioned that.
I know. I just pulled that out of the air.
I love that show. You know, it's funny because those guys would just, they sound like a couple of old mechanics, but they're they're MIT grads. I think one went to Harvard. Yeah, they're crazy.
That's
so
right.
Cool.
They're, we're just a little smarter than them.
So we'll just talk. That's right. Neither one of them have doctor in front of their name. And you're
right.
Dr. Rachel Docekal.
You are Dr. John Diamond, better known as Dr. D.
Or a lot of other things. So I want to ask you today. Okay. So I want you to think about lawyers for a second, right? So when you think about lawyers, I always, as a dad, I think about the jokes. So I come from a big family of lawyers, uncles, cousins. They're, all lawyers out there.
Hit me with your favorite one. I want to hear your favorite joke.
It's not nice though, so I have to think it's a family show. Well, the one that everybody knows. What do you call 50 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean?
What do you call them?
I'm sorry. A good start. So, but the reason it's funny, right, is so often we lawyers get this. Well, I was going to say bad rap, but but a lot of times people think about jokes, or they think about and I met a lawyer who I really want to let everybody get to know a little bit.
Okay.
Because this man is a man that I met him many years ago, and I've actually
didn't have white hair.
When I didn't, I've had white hair for a long time,
John, a long time.
But I remember seeing him with a young man. This is probably a decade ago, in a courthouse, and this guy was really struggling, and I watched this lawyer take off his lawyer hat and just be a human being with this kid, and just say, you know what, kid? And he didn't call him kid, but say, I see the struggle that you're having. Here's what it felt like when I went through that same struggle. Let me help you. And this man has, dedicated his life to not just the practice of law, but to helping people.
To helping families.
He's been a friend of Hanley Center for many years. And as much as he's a wonderful lawyer, he spends a tremendous amount of his time just helping others. And that's the kind of person I want people to meet.
Yes.
Is he going to be here?
He's so.
Yes.
He's going to be here later?
I was waiting. I knew that would come in.
All right. Who's doing the... I'm not much of a percussionist.
I'm sorry. That was great.
Boy, I tried.
But why don't you let me just introduce and tell everybody that we have got with us a guy named Joe Considine, who I've really come to respect and to see as a friend and a person on a mission to help people. So Joe is an attorney in our community, and he's a man who supports others through a lot of different ways. And I just want to really let him tell a little bit about that. So Joe, welcome, first of all.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We are glad to have you here. And I'd like to start by just letting you tell people just a little bit about what do you do, what kind of work do you do, and anything you want us to know about your mission and your own journey.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me here. And like I said, I love that photo of the two of you. It kind of shows who you guys are. You're open, and you look like you're having a good time, but you're also really serious and good professionals. And so...
He doesn't know us.
I know you well. I'm sorry. I know you well. Matter of fact, I don't know if many people know this. I don't know if Dr. D over here knows this, but having grown up in Lake Worth back in the 60s, your grandfather was our family physician.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
It's That's unbelievable.
That yet the Romano family and the Considine family, and your mom was a Romano.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
We go, way back. And your grandfather, I can see how you've become the man that you are, because your grandfather was just, he would take like a chicken or somebody to cut his grass in payment,
Yeah.
So anyway, so I grew up in Lake Worth. I went to Sacred Heart Catholic School, which is not too far away from where the Romanos lived. Your uncle Rodney was 1 year ahead of me, I think. Went to Cardinal Newman after that, then went to Florida State, and then the University of Florida Law School. And along the way, I grew up in a household where my folks had been raised by alcoholic dads, severely alcoholic dads. And it was during the Depression, and they just had the isms without the alcohol. There was never any alcohol in our house, but we had a lot of isms. And you know what I mean by that, right?
You tell us a little bit about that. What is, for everybody listening, what's the isms?
So when we talk about isms, I talk about the effects of having grown up in an alcoholic household. Having, don't trust, don't feel, don't talk,
right.
And don't let anybody know what's going on. Except that there were all kinds of things that were going on, that thankfully I got into recovery November 2nd, 1987. So it was 37 years ago this month.
Wow.
It's extraordinary.
It saved my life, thank goodness. And thank goodness that there were lawyers that preceded me into recovery, guys like Don Donaldson and Jim Robinson, and others who've gone on. And I walked into my first lawyers meeting, and I had been to an AA meeting, and they talked about these principles of, honesty and thinking of others first. And I said, I'm a lawyer. How am I supposed to make a living? How am I supposed to make a living? And they laughed, and they said, sit down, kid. Because back then my hair was very black. And so I listened, and now I can't ever imagine not practicing law without having the principles behind the 12 steps.
That's right.
In whatever the program is.
That's a program for life. We talk a lot about that. It's a program for life.
Yeah.
It is not a program for people in recovery. If we all
That's right.
lived in the 12 steps, this would be a really nice place to live all the time.
Right.
Dr. Anna Lemke, Dopamine Nation, she's a Stanford addiction psychiatrist, and she wrote that book called Dopamine Nation. And she's not in recovery herself, but she says that very thing. She said the 12-step people get it.
Yeah.
They have a way to live their life that is where you can be comfortable,
Right.
in the midst of all of the stuff that's going on.
Peace.
So, I got my brother, who was a friend of the family's, organized the party for me. They called it an intervention. I
didn't know where you were going, Joe, with that.
And I, because I was a young lawyer with a new family, and I had so much stress, and I just needed a way to feel better, and so I did the things that were going on. I was in Miami in the 1980s. Right? That TV show. Yeah. Every time you heard a car backfire, everybody ducked, And so cocaine brought me to my knees. I'm very grateful for that. And I got into recovery, and I have just bought in. I went to meetings. I went to so many meetings. And my life changed so much for the better. And then practiced law and was doing kind of a lot of difficult work, especially in the family law area. And then my partner, Jim Robinson, who had been president of the Palm Beach County Bar Association, he got sick. And he was handling these cases called the Marchman Act cases. He had been a magistrate who was handling that, and then he retired and was handling them. I think he and maybe Alan Levine down in Broward, or Alan Levine's partner.
When was this?
90s.
Okay.
90s, early 2000s. And so then maybe about 15 years ago, Jim was getting sick and was having a hard time getting to court, so I would cover hearings for him. And I was usually my professional life, I was handling these difficult divorce cases, and I was getting so sick of it. You get this, and I'm like, ugh.
Right.
And I walked out of a Marchman Act hearing and thought, oh my gosh, this is law that helps people. Who knew? And that was it. That was it. And it wasn't long after that I said to Jim, have you gone around and talked to any of the treatment centers about this law and how it works? And he said, capital idea. And I forget, I know you were there. Maybe Terry Shapiro, I don't know who.
I remember this. So I started with Hanley in 2010.
Okay.
And I remember, so, for our listeners, treatment centers don't suggest Marchman Acts to families. We don't. I mean, that would be a conflict of interest. But at the same time, our therapists have to understand what a Marchman Act is and what that process is. And that's when I first met you. And I remember you saying, this is a mechanism by which families can help the person who's not ready to help themselves.
Correct.
Well, what is this? We'll come back to that because I want to, because
I remember that
I've heard
so many years later. That was really powerful.
And that challenges some ideas that I've heard that I want to come back to. But for somebody's never heard, they hear you talking about the Marchman Act. What is this?
What is it?
So the Marchman Act it's a statute in Florida. That's a civil statute. It's not a criminal statute that allows a family or any individual who's aware of a person's substance use problems to file paperwork with the court to get a court to order the individual to first be assessed and then to go to treatment. It's called involuntary commitment to treatment. And when I first got into it, I kind of, having spent some time in the Al-Anon space, I was like, well, that seems kind of contrary to everything that I had heard about, in Al-Anon you step over the bodies and you put a pillow under their head if they've passed out and they don't get sober until they want to. Well, that's not, I think I was talking with you and Tim Mayer and some other folks, and I started doing my own research, and there's so much data, so many articles that have been written, scientific articles, some studies that indicate that that's not the case at all, that involuntary commitment to treatment is at least as effective, if not more so, than voluntary treatment. That was really interesting. And then I read an article in the New York Times in the op-ed section by David Brooks, who was quoting an addiction psychiatrist out of Yale, a woman who had been working with heroin, people who were having heroin use disorders, severe. And this addiction psychiatrist said that we're losing an entire generation. This was in the midst of the opioid epidemic, and that we need a form of benign paternalism to save these people. And that's what the Marchman Act is. It's benign paternalism. The state has the right to step in and say, no, you don't get to hurt yourself anymore, because you're not only hurting yourself, you're hurting your loved ones, your kids, and you're driving on the roads as well, impaired. And so the state has the right and has this law, and there's other states that have similar laws. They're not as easy to work with, in my opinion.
The piece of this, though, that I might take issue with is the statement that you don't get to hurt yourself anymore, because what we know with these severe cases of addiction is the addiction is the driver. The person is no longer making a choice. You don't.
That's a great point.
You don't steal everything from your mother and pawn it for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
If family heirlooms, and do that. I don't want to use the word consciously, but the driver is the addiction. And what we know in these severe cases is studies have shown that somebody who's been deprived of water and somebody who's been deprived of alcohol or opiates, they have that same drive. The person who would kill someone to get a drink of water, same thing would happen with the addiction.
Right.
So, the choice is made for somebody who no longer can make that choice for him or herself because they are in the stage of addiction where that choice is not possible.
We call that the neurobiological loss of autonomy.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you and John, you helped me understand that years ago. And when I explained that to parents and say, look, your child is not making a decision. The child that you knew is not making decisions. Their prefrontal cortex has been completely taken over and has become essentially the servant. You can correct me because I've tried to translate this into lay people. The prefrontal cortex, which makes our decisions for us, I've worked long enough, red light, stop, I need to eat.
Sure.
It's now been taken over by the dopaminergic pathways that come from the mesolimbic part of the brain because of the continual and the chronic use of substances. And this is a lawyer talk, to wit.
I mean, you're going from scientist to lawyer. It's back and forth.
Gavin
how many times
Newsom.
can we say to wit now?
wit.
To wit. Let's say it.
I highly recommend. You can quote me on that
wit.
too. So, regardless of his politics, when Gavin Newsom, because California has so many homeless people, and 50% of them about are substance use and mental health disorder. When he was addressing the well-meaning progressives who said, we're taking away their civil rights, what about their agency? What about their autonomy? And he said, what autonomy is there when the person is running in the street naked, or in one case that we had, was taking a brick and hitting himself in the head to make the voices stop, And he said, what autonomy are we talking about here? And that's the conversation that I'm committed to having with as many people as possible. I was asked to testify before a subcommittee of the Oregon legislature not too long ago, and two of the legislators told me no one had ever talked to them about neurobiological loss of autonomy.
Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
Right.
It's insane. The piece, though, that I want to talk about just quickly is for the person saying, oh, my goodness, are they going to lock my loved one up? No. Hanley Foundation sits on 14 acres of botanical garden. Yeah. We always have half dozen or so patients who are with us because of a Marchman Act. We are not a lockdown facility.
Right.
If that individual decides that he or she is going to leave, that's between that individual and the court. We are not,
we don't tackle people.
We don't tackle people.
Right.
We know they're going. We try to dissuade them from going, but we don't tackle them.
And it's one of the things that, because I've often thought about that, and there's been so many times where I've thought, if I could tackle this person, I would, because when it is so life and death, right? When a person truly is in the throes of full-blown addiction and their autonomy is compromised, and it doesn't look like that, right? To people from the outside, they're saying, you're completely, you've got all your autonomy. You had to go through all of these steps to get to the liquor store or to get to the drug dealer. People would say, if you put all of that effort into recovery, you'd be. But the reality is, and you started to talk about it, that addiction does look a lot in the brain like somebody who's starving to death, or right. If you're in a life or death situation, you're literally, the blood flow is going to move from your brain, from the prefrontal cortex and from those areas. I think about it like the midbrain and that mesolimbic system that you talked about. That's our instincts, right? That's our raw impulse, and then the frontal areas of our brain are like the reins or the steering wheel, things that control that impulse. And man, when somebody's in the throes of addiction, their world gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point that all their brain is telling them is, you have to have the drug or you will die.
That's right.
So it's not every other consequence, but everybody looking sees all the consequences. You're hurting yourself, you're hurting others, but when the addicted brain is hijacked, and I actually really love that term, the person literally can't see it. So that idea, it sounds like what you're saying, because I was always taught for a long time that people have got to want it in order to get better. And what you're saying is, not only do people not have to want it, but people can come in really not liking it and being really ticked off, and given enough time for their brain to heal, they can get better.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I want to speak to that point, but first I want to address what Rachel talked about in terms of, the campus is not locked. The way what the law does is it provides psychological leverage to the individual that says, look, these are not locked facilities. Baker Act facilities are locked, Marchman not.
No.
Doesn't fit the business model. I don't know why, it doesn't matter. But what the court order provides is the psychological leverage that says, look, if you walk out of here, Hanley has to, or whatever treatment facility, has to let the court know.
That's right.
And then the court schedules a contempt hearing. And you could be found in contempt of court, and you could be incarcerated, but only until you agree to go back and comply with the court order and go back to treatment. I quickly tell parents, look, you're in charge of this litigation. We don't have to. I think in the hundreds and hundreds of cases, I lost count after 500. We put 5 people into jail overnight because we had to pull them out of shooting galleries. We basically, or off the street because the woman was hooking. We had to do that. As soon as they came back into court the next day, and when the magistrate said, "Are you willing to follow my order?" and they said yes, they were released from jail, and we call it jail therapy. Or a nudge from the judge, and those are effective. You like that?
I like the nudge from the judge.
I knew you would like that. I knew you would like that. And we find that in the super majority of the cases, that's enough. That's enough. These people are not happy at first when they come to see you, but I'm like, that's not my problem. That's Hanley's problem. And I tell parents, you don't want them anywhere other than a place like Hanley for them to deal with that anger, because that's probably some of the things that's been driving the use.
Joe, the thing that's interesting is there is not one patient who comes to our facility who at some point during their treatment episode, doesn't find him or herself unhappy. We talk about that 2 weeks. So at 2 weeks, the family gets a call, I've got to get a haircut. I need this. I don't like my roommate. The food is terrible, whatever it is. I mean, we have better food than most restaurants in the Southeast U.S. And, they complain about whatever it is that they think that the family that's so used to enabling them is going to buy and come and pick them up. So Marchman Act patients just aren't happy at the beginning. By 2 weeks, usually they're happy, and they flip-flop with the folks who day one said, I really want to be here, and then 2 weeks later they want to go and have access to use.
And let me use that to say, too, that you don't have to, the Marchman Act can work on people who have initially voluntarily come into treatment, but after a week they're like, I'm good, right. I'm leaving. Families can also enact the Marchman Act for those people as well. John, you were going to...
No, it is interesting to think about that switch. But when we talk about families enacting the Marchman Act, because it is true, I hadn't really thought about that, but I'm going through all these different patients in my head, and it's about the 2-ish week mark. So I've done, I've been the assessor. So when a patient is ordered, they have to, it's not automatic, right? So they go to an assessor, and the assessor is a qualified professional, and they make an assessment, and they have to find very specific, not just that this person's using too much, or not that this but they've lost their ability to control their use. And that their judgment, there's 4 different criteria, you can talk about them a little more, but their judgment is they're in that mindset. They're in that place where the reins are off. And I've been the assessor in 100 or 200. I also, I'm with you, lost count. And I've found that most people, so people come in, they're angry, they don't like me in particular, because I'm going to make the yes or no.
And sometimes you say no.
There are times, but But what's interesting is that the vast majority of times I've been able to develop really great therapeutic rapport and good relationships with patients after some time. And I find that the way you do that is just being real with people. If I'm super honest with people, super, transparent. And I've seen you do this. I've seen you develop like rapport with people as the lawyer who's, how do you do that? If you were talking to to another, lawyers, especially people who aren't trained as clinicians, what is the secret to getting people, to developing rapport and relationship with people who you might actually be they might see you as the enemy?
So I say that this is not all the other, I've been a trial lawyer for 40 years or so. All those cases were adversarial. This is not adversarial. This is therapeutic.
Yeah.
It really is. And I have to kind of every once in a while, because my old divorce lawyer mentality will come in. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I just have to breathe and say, wait a minute, this is somebody's life that we're talking about and their family. And we have to treat them with as much dignity and respect as we possibly can at all times. And so that's my premise, to start with, and then having had a child myself who, I said to her, you can't come back to my house. And her mother said, you can't come back to my house. And she looked at me and she said, oh, I know what you'll do. And I said, well, you know what I do. You know what I do. And she looked at me and she scrunched her face up and pointed her finger and she said, you're dead to me. Well, Mom's in the industry. She's a therapist. I do this. I still even just had a visceral response to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And about a month later, she was on the phone sobbing, thank you so much. I haven't been this clear-headed in so long.
Yes.
So
That's right.
I know what treatment does for people.
Yeah.
Of course, I have my own experience, from 30-odd years ago, but to have a child, and I tell parents this, they're not going to be happy, but again, you're dealing with the hijacked brain of your loved one.
Right.
And the duty is, as a parent or a friend or a loved one, is to act. And I tell this story, and I have permission from them. So Dad and Mom are in my office. Dad's a lawyer, and Mom is kind of a junior league person, and I'm explaining all of this, and the mom said, she'll never speak to us again. And how about if she can't get into an Ivy League school? And this is a young woman who's out selling her body,
Yeah.
And so, and the husband has tears in his eyes, and he puts his hand on his wife's hand. He says, darling, I hear what you're saying, and that makes sense. But here's what matters to me. And I get a little emotional sometimes about this. If I'm standing at our daughter's grave because this disease has taken her out, I want to know in my heart that I've done everything humanly possible to save her life. And if we do save her life and she chooses not to have me in her life anymore, I've done my job as a parent.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I'll be sad, but I'm okay with that. And when I tell that to parents, all the kind of like, the yeah buts, like, oh, okay. That is the issue, isn't it?
That's right.
That is the issue. Now I want to fast forward 13 years. That young woman is now in my firm. She's sober 13 years, and she's going to law school.
I love that.
And she loves the Marchman Act.
So I have a few things to say about Joe.
Let's hear it.
So our listeners at this probably haven't seen it, but I want to answer your question as well. You're really funny in a dry way. And, when I'll say to the families out there, if you ever are working with Joe and you sit there and you think to yourself, wait a minute, was that just a joke? The answer is yes. It's just that his humor is so dry and so real that sometimes you don't realize it. But the mistiness that I just saw from you when you started to tell that story, I've probably seen that mistiness a dozen times at least, because your passion exceeds your practice. So you are here for passion before you're here for practice. And I understand that we all have a mortgage and we're all paying the bills and, trying to do right by our family. But I can say that all three people at this table are here for passion first. Yep. And you are one of those people who's really making a difference. And in the behavioral health industry, there aren't as many as there should be. Right. And you are one of the good guys. And I love that about you. Now, I've seen him be Misty 13 times.
Thank you so much.
There you go.
Well, it makes a difference, to have done the work, have done my own work around this, and to see how good life can be, to be sober, and to be able to deal with family of origin type issues. Right. It just makes such a big difference in the enjoyment of life, and who are we not to want to share that with our friends and family and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's for, we're out of time now, but I'd love to have you back and talk about that second part of the journey that you just said, to have, being sober, but then also what is, love to come back and spend a whole show on just what does it look like to continue to grow as a human being. I think sometimes people think, if I have addiction, I just get the drugs out or I get, then everything's done. But it's not, right? There's a gift of constant growth. So
I know that we're almost out of time. I do want to just spend a couple minutes at this podcast. I guess we're going to go over a few minutes. Joe, I want to just, I want to make sure that we are delivering the information to our listeners that we promise. What does that look like for a family? If I'm a family and I'm struggling with a loved one's, we had a family a couple weeks ago, who, the individual came into treatment, but, the son was an older individual, actually had been married, was single, but, this is not something that we're dealing with a kid. These were older parents. The son was in his 50s, and, the parents felt that they needed to act. In that type of scenario, this wasn't a client of yours, but in that type of scenario, mom or dad calls you. What are the steps? What does a Marchman Act look like? Just so that somebody can wrap their head around it. I don't want to send everybody out to Google.
Good question. No, really good.
Yeah.
Good question. Nuts and bolts. Can tell why you're the CEO.
Yes, you can.
So what we'll do is we'll be on the phone with the individual. We'll get some basic data. We'll send out a client information package to them that's going to ask them, a lot of biopsychosocial type questions. Tell us all about what's been going on, and tell us about prior treatment, and tell us about any hospitalizations, DUIs. Tell us all this stuff. And then we'll get on, and we send them our information as well, direct them to our website, joeconsidinelaw.com. It's got great videos of me, articles I've written, things that families have said about the process. And I really ask families not to write about me, but to write about the process. The process, because there's so much trepidation at first, So then they send that information back, and then we get on the phone with them and kind of go back through the details. And then it's a matter of us drafting a petition usually on an emergency basis. So I drafted one and filed this morning at 9:30, and before I came over here, we got a court order saying, you can't leave the facility. You have to stay there and be assessed. I filed another one maybe at 10 o'clock, and I'm waiting to hear. I'm hoping that, we got an order directing the person, into treatment. So it can be done if the facts indicate a true emergency, which most of the cases,
right.
We have a bumper sticker that says, "When all else fails, call Joe." Because that's kind of the case.
They don't come to you on their best day.
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
And then we get a court order for that person to be involuntarily assessed and stabilized. Now, they may not be in the facility, in which case we make arrangements with law enforcement. And we have great law enforcement folks locally
We
that understand this issue. And I go on pickups a lot, and they basically will say, look, you know, they use firm but very polite voices. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have a court order here. Your family's concerned about you. You're going to come with us, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And you can either come with us willingly, or we will put you in cuffs and we will put you in the car. Now, a lot of times it's nice to be working with a case manager or an interventionist. We have great interventionists that you all work with as well.
I can only think of a handful of times when a patient came to us who was brought to us by law enforcement. Usually there's a lot of, the court order married with love.
Yes.
And the interventionist really brings a lot of love.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite cases, is when there's an interventionist or a third party who will sit down with the person and say, look, we want you to come and we want you to go to treatment. And then at some point in the talk, they'll pull out a court order if the person's saying, no.
Yeah.
They'll pull out the court order and they'll say, but, you're going to either you come with me. It's like, with that same daughter when she was little and she didn't want to take her antibiotics, and I would say easy or hard, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I hope that you'll come with me and you can listen to. You can listen to some. You like country? I have country on my stereo. Mm-hmm. But if not, the sheriff is about 30 minutes away, and I've never had a person say, oh, heck no, I'm going with the sheriff. They always go with the interventionist.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying. They love the interventionist.
And that is a lovely blend. I like how you said that, of that with love.
Yeah, because this is all done with love. Families are not investing the time and resources into working with counsel if they hate the person. I mean, they're not doing that.
No.
There's a young man who came to treatment almost under Marchman Act almost 2 years ago, and boy, he was mad as could be, especially at me. He had special nicknames for me as the guy who was.
So do we all, John.
Well, his were real special. I can't say them on air, but and then he did pretty well. But then he had a severe relapse, and then and again came in under a Marchman Act the second time, and for him both times was brought in by the sheriff. And he's about 2 years clean now, living this beautiful, beautiful life. Still comes in, helps others who are new in treatment, comes to Hanley to volunteer, helps others. And we were talking a couple of months ago about the officer that brought him in, the deputy. And I remarked, because I remember the deputy being just so caring and really cared about this kid, the young man, and he said, oh my gosh, I got to find that guy. I got a call about 3 weeks ago. He left me a message. He found the deputy that brought him in handcuffs twice, so that he could call him and say, thank you for your kindness, thank you. And that gets me. So it is at the end of the day, when you're cared for and when you're loved, lives change.
So
They do. And treatment works.
Yeah.
Treatment works. And more treatment works better.
Yes.
That's right.
So that's the other thing. The initial treatment order can be up to 90 days, and it can be renewed for subsequent periods of time. I want to say one last thing, because parents will say, look, we've tried this before. It's rarely ever one and done.
Right.
And I point to, and I have his permission. I've been on the board at Fern House, which is a place for indigent men.
Yeah.
It's great work.
And Chuck Cordell is our executive director.
Yes, good man.
17 treatment episodes.
Wow.
15 years sober now.
Yeah.
And I'll tell people that. I say, Chuck, you don't know how many people you help when I tell this story. And they'll go like, the families will go, oh my, oh, okay.
That's right.
I said, that's something for you folks that you can speak to better about what happens to the brain and why it takes what it takes.
Right.
Yeah, it does.
But, like Jimmy Valvano said, never give up, never give up, never, ever, ever give up.
Well, and one of the things you talk about is, if you come in for 90 days and then the person relapses, their brain still had that 90 days of healing.
That's right.
They're 90 days better off.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's just a return of symptoms. That's all that it is.
That's right.
And that happens with every chronic disease.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
So I want to keep going.
I do too, but we really are out of time.
We
now.
are really out of time. Joe,
This is Dewey Cheatham and Howe.
Dewey Cheatham and Howe.
and Joe, before we go, tell us that website again, because you really do have some great,
Yeah,
your
you have
website,
really
you've got
good
some great
resources.
resources.
It's Joe Considine, CONSIDINE, JoeConsidineLaw.com.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Dr. D. Good seeing you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
everybody, for
D.
being with us. We'll see you next time on The Hanley Effect.
See ya.
Thank you for joining us for the Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.